What did you think of the blow up between Zelensky and Trump as you're sitting there in the dugout?
Well, it is. It was a very disturbing place to watch it from. Perhaps anywhere would have been. Um, and I mean, obviously, it was a meeting that shouldn't have happened. It was far too early.
Why do you think so? There's not enough actual pathways to peace on the table.
Well, I think the mineral deal. I mean, I love the fact that everyone's now an expert in Eastern Ukrainian mineral deposits. But
I think, as I've learned, and we'll talk about Israel and Palestine, I'm learning that everybody's an expert on geopolitics and
yes.
history of war on the internet.
and now mineral deposits, obviously.
Yes.
I'm really speaking at the edge of my mineral deposit knowledge here. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, from what I could see, the deal that the American administration was trying to get the Ukrainian government to sign was sort of too early, too forced. The Ukrainians were ready to sign a deal, but were obviously under intense pressure. And I think certainly Zelensky wasn't expecting to go until pretty much the day before. Was obviously visibly tired and exhausted again, as you are after that amount of pressure for that long a time. And no, I mean, the thing that struck me, and I said this in my column in the New York Post from there, that the thing that struck me was I said to some of the soldiers I was with, what do you make of this? And, one of them just said to me, well, we're advised not to follow too closely the ins and outs of the politics of this, and but of course everyone has Instagram or scrolls, and among the dog pictures and the hot women or whatever is what happened in the Oval. And but what struck me was this same guy and saying, I've got a job to do.
Right. And there's a clarity and a wisdom to that. But your job is bigger than that, right? Is to understand the politics as well. And what do you think about the politics of that moment? Because that was a real opportunity to come together and make progress on peace, right? And it, by all accounts, was not a successful step forward.
I don't think by any account it was a successful step forward, unless to some extent it was play but from DC to say to Putin, look, we duffed off Zelensky and, now give us something. That's the only remedial idea I have about what might have been behind it. But I think it was just one of those extremely, just awful political moments. Zelensky was obviously deeply irritated by the interpretation of the war that he was hearing from Washington. It was only a week after the Trump comments about Zelensky being a dictator, and people in the administration implying that Ukraine has started the war. And I think that must be, for Zelensky, a pretty Alice in Wonderland situation to be in. And I had significant sympathy for him in finding it bewildering, because it would be bewildering.
I think the sad thing to me also, on the mundane details of that meeting, and just the unfortunate way that meetings happen, I think it's true that he was also exhausted.
Yes.
There was a dickhead of a reporter that was asked a question about outfit in a way that, listen, Zelensky, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. He's an emotional being, for better or for worse. And there's a dumb dickhead of a reporter.
Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend. He is. Yeah.
The things you know. See, you're a real journalist.
He's from one of the new. I'm all for opening up the White House press pool and all that sort of thing, but it means that you get some people in who are sort of, from blog land. There's nothing wrong with that, but it means that you get somebody who will do something like that. The problem with that interaction, as I saw it, was that that guy asked that disrespectful question, and I think it was disrespectful. I'll very quickly say why. I mean, I think that when a man comes from the realm of war into the realm of peace, the people in the realm of peace should have some respect, or at least concession, that the other man has come from the realm of war. And that if you're sitting in a political environment where you talk about people being destroyed and decimated and defenestrated and much more, to a man for whom none of that is metaphorical, I think that's extremely hard to accept. And I think that probably also at that moment there was a sort of sense of, Zelensky is being disrespected by being asked about what he's wearing. When, as everyone knows, Churchill during World War II used to wear his fatigues on foreign visits. And it's sort of just that, it's to remind people that you're coming from the realm of war. And I think that probably in that moment, one of the things that would have been going through his head would be, but I mean, if this was Putin sitting here being insulted by a journalist, you'd hope your host stepped in and defended you. I mean, let me try this one out. I mean, if a journalist in the Oval Office, if Putin was sitting there, or a putative journalist said to Putin, everyone knows you've had a lot of facial work done, and word is that you've used the same guy that Berlusconi used to use. Can you comment on that? You'd say, well, that's a kind of disrespectful question for journalists to ask, and it's a little bit off what needs to be gone over. And it's the same thing with Zelensky with the outfit. I think it was just petty and threw things off in a bad way.
Yeah, and it was poorly researched, because I think Zelensky was explained this like 3 years ago at the beginning of the war, why he wears what he wears, and he's been consistent wearing the same
It's
thing.
also, by the way, it's an example of the frivolity of a lot of the attempts to understand what's going on. I mean, my view is that since actually most people, in fact everybody, cannot be an expert on everything, one of the things that we always do is to seize on minor and really quite unimportant things. I mean, every side does it. Look at the way in which the American right for years talked about the Churchill bust leaving the White House Oval Office in the Obama years. I didn't want to hear another darn thing about the Churchill bust after 8 years, because it was in lieu of trying to understand and actually critique Obama's foreign policy. It was just an easy shorthand. I think it's the same. We're always tempted to that.
But the thing is, I think you mentioned Putin. I think Putin would have been able to respond himself to that journalist effectively, and he would have done it in Russian.
Oh yeah, the language thing was.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of lay out several just unfortunate things that happen in these situations. And I think it happens in all peace negotiations, and it's funny how history can turn in moments like this. I do think there's a dickhead reporter, combined with the fact that with all due respect, but Zelensky's English sometimes is not very good.
Yes, and apart from anything else, if he had agreed to have not done it in English, he would have bought himself the extra seconds in some of his replies that he needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and have the wit. The guy is funny, witty, intelligent. He could do that in the native language of whether it's Ukrainian or Russian, to be able to respond and get the interpreter. So all of that is really unfortunate, because I think on those little moments, it's a dance, and there's an opportunity there. The Republicans, the right wing in the United States, have a general kind of skepticism of Zelensky,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it has to be that way. It can turn, it can change, it can evolve.
It's very interesting why it has happened. Why do you think it's happened?
The politics in the United States is so dumb that at the very beginning, it could just be reduced to, well, the left went Putin bad, Zelensky good, rah, rah, Ukrainian flags. Therefore, the right must go the opposite.
Yeah,
It sometimes is literally as dumb as that. Let's each pick a side and call the other just dumb.
I had a line I used recently, which the necessity of people who live too long online to try to wade their way out of the memes. It is so like that, isn't it? Because yes, I mean, I can understand the people who find it very irritating that so many people who would put BLM flags or pride flags or trans flags in their bio, then put Ukrainian flags in their bio, despite almost certainly not knowing where Ukraine was. And if that happens, the inevitable instinct of a lot of people who aren't really thinking is to say, that's really annoying. These people are really annoying. I'll sock it to them. But that's where you've got to try to rise above that and say, actually, funnily enough, the fate of a country doesn't depend on my tolerance for memes online today.
Yeah, so I think the memes can be broken through in meetings like the one that happened between Zelensky and Trump. There could have been real camaraderie. I've seen the skill of that just recently, having researched deeply and interacted with Narendra Modi. Here's somebody who has the skill of, for his country, for his situation, being able to somehow be friends with Putin and friends with Zelensky and friends with Trump and friends with Biden and friends with Obama.
That's very skillful.
And that, while still being strong for his country and like fundamentally a nationalist figure who's like, very not globalist, not anything but pro-India, India first, nation first. In fact, nation first with a very specific idea what that nation represents.
Sure.
And that, Zelensky could do all of those things, but have the skill of navigating the Trump room, because every single leader has their own peculiar quirks that need to be navigated.
Yes, the obvious one, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was all Zelensky's fault, but I mean, the obvious one was at the beginning of the meeting to say yet again, as he has done for 3 years, thank you to America and the American people and American politicians from across the aisle for your support for my country in its hour of need. We're deeply grateful. And because he, for once, forgot to say that.
I think it's not that simple. I think
it's not that simple. It's one reason.
I think saying thank you, he didn't need to say thank you. That
was why that was what Vance leapt in on.
He's just picking a thing to leap on. There's a whole energy. You have to acknowledge in your way of being that you have been very Biden buddy with the left for the last 4 years. There's ways to fix that. Listen, these people are complicated narcissists, all of them, Biden, Trump. You have to navigate the complexity of that. And you basically have to say a kind word to Trump, which is like showing, there's many ways of doing that, but one of them is saying, feeding the ego by acknowledging that he is one of the world's greatest negotiators, right? I'm glad we're able to come to the table and negotiate together, because I believe you are the great negotiator, mediator that can actually bring a successful resolution to, like, as opposed to have an energy of like, it should be obvious to everybody that Ukraine are the good guys and Russia is the bad guys. There's this whole energy of entitlement that he brought. He forgot that there's a new guy. You got to like convince the new guy that this global mission that this nation is on, this war that is in many ways the West versus the East, that there's ideals, there's whole histories here, that this is a war worth winning. You have to convince them, right?
Yeah, no, sure. And he obviously failed on that occasion. But as I say, it must be bewildering to have landed in a place where people were seriously talking about Ukraine starting the war,
right?
And Zelensky, not Putin, being the dictator. I did the front page of the New York Post the day after the president's comments on that, saying that, the big picture of Putin, just saying, right, this is a dictator. And, I think that people can be lithe enough to be able to recognize that, you can make criticisms of Zelensky or the Ukrainians, but it doesn't mean you have to fall full Putin. And again, unfortunately, a lot of people in our time don't have that capability.